Good afternoon, good evening, day. See everybody. I'm hoping you're well. Now, as usual, feel free to look around, see who's with us today. Good to come together for a little while each week. Mm, what a funny thing, huh? What a good thing. Mm, okay, well, you should probably get to business and sit for a little while. So, as usual, as always, is taking that time to, get comfortable, settled physically into your seated posture, lying if that feels necessary at this point. Of course, we can stand, walk, sit, or lie, and any of those forms really practicing in a formal and authentic way. We understand why the seated posture has a certain balance energetically of rest and energy can be conducive. But of course, there are sometimes things happening, body, mind, in our lives, where another posture may be more appropriate. So, whatever position you find the body in, starting to settle into that, not so much through control, but through interest and kind of receptive interest. What does it feel like from the inside? Not our ideas of our back, our shoulders, head, hands, legs, feet, but the physical sensations. Bewildering it as they may be, as unfamiliar as they may seem. And similarly, just orienting towards that question of the position, the condition, situation of the heart, mind, the flavors, contours of emotion, mind states, knowings, fabrication, really of a different quality and range of qualities than the physical sensations we can experience directly in the body. And yet they're in correspondence with each other. An emotion will often have a corresponding range of physical experiences, sensations come alongside it or invoked by it. And physical sensations themselves can evoke knowing, awareness, emotion, contraction, or opening of the heart. This amazing dynamism between these realities, often very rapid, mysterious, yet we can begin to fathom the nature of this correspondence between name and form, mind and body, mentality, materiality. Because really, this is all we're observing moment. Especially if we invite the inclusion of sound, visual seeing, smell and taste, all of these sensitivities that are still very attuned to the material world, the physical. This coming together of these streams of experience, producing all kinds of currents and whirlpools, illusions, confusion. And our job here is not to perfect those streams, to manipulate them, change them, make them how we want them to be, but to understand sensation in the body, its particular qualities. Of these, there's a sense of feeling tone, pleasant or unpleasant or neutral, feeling tone that arises in the heart, mind. Often then a liking or disliking, or an abandoning, ignoring, clinging, grasping, or rejecting, dismissing. The mind moves towards something more pleasant, more stable, imaginately so. The body reasserts itself. We start to observe these whirlpools, these dynamics, These back and forth, producing this forward motion that seems like a self. And all of it can be observed without judgment, but seeing clearly, sometimes even seeing with kindness and care, contraction in the body, contraction in the heart, ease in the mind, ease in the body. Just trying our best to keep up. Sometimes it is very helpful to try to attune to one field of attention. So the body primarily, the hands primarily, the breath at the abdomen rising and falling. But it doesn't mean that the rest of it stops. There's seeing and hearing, wanting and knowing, imagining. We receive and fathom on its own terms. Where are we sensitive to the causal dynamics between mind and body? Learning with compassion and aspiration to unbind from patterns of clinging or rejecting, craving, and hatred based in ignorance. It's through wisdom we are freed, and through observing we come to understand little by little, moment by moment, as best we can. So we do have a little time for questions if anyone has any about your practice, instructions, uh, talk last week, things arising, passing in your life, or I can be supportive or might be able to be supportive with. The best way to let me know is at the bottom of the screen, there's a button that says raise hand. You can click on that. I'll see you have a question. Or you can just type into the chat that you have a question to me and I'll call on you. Or you can wave your actual hand. Tend to see that. Hi, Layla. Let's see. I think you can unmute yourself now.
Hello. So at the end of your talk last week, you mentioned hope. And I actually don't remember the exact context, but it triggered something in me. And I guess it's just something another one of those things that I've struggled with, come back to, thought about a lot over my life. And mainly in a kind of worldview sense, like I mean, I guess it basically comes down to I get so frustrated with our species. um and and so I have a hard time mustering up hope for humanity. And you know, I think um I look for ways, I look for the good. I celebrate the good in people that I see in people, but the natural world, the non-human world has always um given me much more happiness, pleasure, with yeah, contentment than people. And I guess I'm just wondering what the Buddha had to say about that, what you have to say about that, what
Yeah, so no, so it's one of these how was that word? It's a question that is occurring. It's just like uh
yeah.
not seasonal. It's just like it's a sense of like I think we often come back to it and it's persistent. I mean, I will start just by saying I actually don't know what the Buddha said or if he said anything about hope. It's funny, it is not a word that and or whatever the word might be in Pali, it's not something that I have heard a lot, and I think one hears a lot in terms of formal Dhamma. Um, it's a, and and of course you can see why, which is to say, so much of the teaching is around we're the owners of our actions, and so hope plays no part
Right.
in it, right? Where it's like
Right.
what happens is based on action, and so um, that so I mean I think I tend, and I think some of it is like personality wise. So it's like it's a place where I also feel like it's important to kind of be careful, um, to be very kind of skeptical about it, about how the role of it in terms of spiritual practice, spiritual development, which doesn't mean to say I don't think there's a role for it in other contexts that might be important, right? For this idea for like people to have hope, whether it's a medical diagnosis or political situation or what have you. So I mean, you didn't go into a lot of detail, but my guess is that it sounds like a similar kind of range of kind of considerations, I guess, right? Of
Yeah.
is it realistic and is it helpful? Is it just delusional?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
or am I just a negative person?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Uh,
Where's that line?
right. Yeah, I think it's a good line. Or I don't know if there's a line, but I think it's a good, you know. Yeah, I do remember saying it in a talk last week at the end, and it had something to do with like if there's hope, it's in this. And I don't even quite remember what I was saying, but something about the practice and how we should, if we see things clearly or whatever. Um, I am a little bit, I will say I am skeptical of hope as I think it's you're never I don't think it's something that can be gotten rid of. I think we have it. It arises at times. And I think to me it's a really powerful kind of question as to what's the difference between hope and wanting,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
like how different are those really? Um, and it's wanting, and it's the idea of having putting a lot of investment on a future moment, a future experience of satisfaction or happiness on on the unknown future and on
Yeah.
something, so I think that there is a sense of like there's ways of spelling out the sort of danger in hope, right? On the other hand, there's also the danger in what's this sort of like the cynicism side of it, right? Which is that there's no hope and that everything looks negative and is certainly going into the negative direction for whatever, myself, the world, anything, the universe, anything in between. Um, and I think that you can also tend to see is often has this flavor of aversion that is protective, right? That is, um, trying to kind of protect ourselves on some level from disappointment by a kind of preemptive sort of negativity. And that neither of them have to be those things, but I think that they tend to be it's important to see where those flavors and where those kind of aspects of it are and take responsibility for it. Um, there's a there's a great quotation from Jean Le Carré, the spy novelist. He he writes something. It's in like one of the Smiley books where he says he talking about sort of like his enemy and the other spy side, but the Soviet spy or whatever, like that he realized that every fanatic has a hidden doubt. And I think that's just like actually a very amazing uh, insight. And that the
Mm.
other side is true, that every cynic has like a hidden hopefulness. that
Yeah.
there actually is this sort of like inner kind of dialectical thing happening for most of us if we're on one more on one side or the other of that is important to see, and that is we're not in relationship with it, right? And so this question of like, well, where are we in relationship with our cynicism? Where are we in relationship with our hopefulness? That is not trying to judge it or shut it down, but kind of understand it and understand the role it's playing in our relationship to ourselves or to life or to the world. And I'd say that tends to still be the kind of, I'd say the most important part is like, whether it's right or wrong or you can do anything about it, it's just like kind of understanding our our relationship to these forces in us, and um, to not deny that they're both going to have some positive value, and they're both going to have a shadow side if unattended to and unkind of observed. What I would say is there's a famous Emily Dickinson poem that just says something of like, I dwell in possibility.
Mm.
And in some ways, I feel like that might be the most important aspect, where it's like
Yeah.
maybe it's not hopefulness, but it's possible. Like, you're not denial of that. Like, we don't actually know what's possible, but that there are a lot of things that are possible that might not, our minds might not tend to be open to or receptive to, and that resistance is limiting, and so that
Yeah.
we can see the possibility of things, and that might be some kind of way forward between those two, between sort of like what can seem like, delusional hopefulness and just bitter cynicism, um, as
I
one
love
direction.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that, being open to the possibilities. Yeah.
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 That's nice.
So John Le Carre and Emily Dickinson.
All
That'll be
right.
our, our, our
Thank
guide.
you.
Yeah. Thanks, Ella. Kate.
Yes. Um, I think it's a little connected to what Layla is asking. I'm I'm seeing like being between cynicism and hopefulness, or um even past and future, and it's uncomfortable. Like being in between is like really um sometimes bored, sometimes like disorienting, and sometimes in itself overwhelming. And I I have enough faith to stay in between, like not try to reach for the extreme. And sometimes I do, and that's totally fine. But even being between, trying to place myself in between like a whirly wind or all these things and middle paths, and really having faith in that sounds nice, and in reality it really doesn't feel that nice. It feels so vulnerable, and that might be just like the dukkha aspect of it, but um yeah, sometimes I don't know what to do with it, and I'm like, oh. And even sharing practice, I was like, I don't really know if I want to share this. um uh yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a question in that, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like such a good expression of, yeah, that it's one of these things, like you ended there, right? In terms of practice is, yeah, this idea that has, because of all the mishmash of everything in the world right now, or if we'll just limit it to the world of mindfulness. The idea that the present moment is a beautiful, safe relief Like not the Buddha, that's just not what the Buddha said, right? That comes from other things where it's like, come back to the present. And the present is like, that's where we will find salvation. Where it's like, no, exactly what you're pointing to. The present is very uncomfortable and as you're also pointing to, for any number of reasons, or any number of sort of like dynamics. I mean, the eight worldly winds, or the, whatever it might be, that it's very uncomfortable. We can find our way through that, and also as part of what you're describing, or you can find through the abiding in that discomfort. And sometimes there are things that make it less uncomfortable, like concentration, but ultimately it's the wisdom that and the strength. Michelle talks so much more about strength these days, right? That this is supposed to be strengthening. And I think there's something really great about that, because on one hand there is a passivity, right? That we're not manipulating, we're not trying to control, we're just sort of receiving it. But also the idea that that is, if we do it carefully and with the right tools, actually makes the mind stronger and makes the dukkha of the present moment bearable to what's beyond merely bearable, because it also happens to be the source of insight. and that's that tension of like, it in itself is dukkha. It is. And when you say it's just dukkha, it's like, yes, it is. It's like, it's dukkha. The present moment is dukkha, whatever aspect of it you're trying to look at. And so but it is through that fact and through the mechanisms and mechanics of dukkha and hardship and undependability, and that we come to get stronger through the purification process. And again, it's valuing the purification versus just the purity. I mean, sometimes, of course, we long for these moments of just like, oh, we're in it and it's okay. And that so much of the time we're in it and it really is not okay. And it really doesn't feel okay. And yet, that's a lot of the time, but it's that willingness and the courage it takes. And you start to see like, oh yeah, it is courageous and it is heroic, in all of these ways. But that's why it's hard, that's where the learning is. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that resonates, but I really do. The discomfort is we're avoiding that, right? I mean, it's why we land on this or that, or solidify something, because it feels more stable, it feels more comfortable to be certain, and sitting in that is hard, yeah.
Even like, yeah. Even when you say, I do understand why Michelle say strengthen the mind, I think. But it's not like like a it's not like a strength that like, um yeah, and I think I know that, but and at the same time, there's like part of me that's like confused, like that hardening and softening and strength isn't exactly connected with softening or and yeah, even voicing that in that way of like strength in mind. And I understand, again, like I'm not like opposing to that, but
No, yeah, I get it. It's
it
paradoxical,
yeah,
at the very least. Yeah.
yeah.
If it's not really feeling contradictory. But that is like, I mean, and that's there is that, I mean, a part of it is just the limitation of language, any human language to try to describe anything, because there is that part of it is important, because it's true not just for strength, but for anything, like even energy. You know, when you're talking really about the most, like virya in its most powerful form, it's not almost recognizable as what we think of as energy, right? Which is like, like we think of energy as like tense and to some degree, there's a stress in it, even if it's a positive stress. There's a voltage, there's an intensity to it, and that you look at the most far out expression of virya is like very quiet. It's very quiet, and like how does that? We don't even know what we're aiming for, and yet we're kind of trying to aim for something. And so I think the idea of strength is similar, or really any of these things where it's like we're aiming for something that is still a concept. Not always, sometimes we have had experiences, but there is a part of the path that's always, until the very end, that's gonna be there. There's gonna be some element of like we're sort of like casting forward and pulling ourselves based on something we don't actually know. And that is I mean, you brought up faith, right? There is something of like sometimes we feel like we really have faith in that. And of course, sometimes it's very hard to have faith in that because it's an unknown thing. It's where the faith starts to build is like, oh, you look back kind of like you're saying at the past. It's like you can also look at the past and be like, oh, I have experienced things that are clarifying that I didn't understand at some point in the past, but then I came to understand. And at some point those can be sort of supportive aspects, But I do think it's an important place to point out where like it does call for some faith, and that sometimes we feel like we don't have it, and that can be disorienting, and hard. And then sometimes I think there is that place where it's like, well, when you don't have the faith, there's something where do you go? You can go to just the mechanics of it, of like, well, you trust some basic thing about just following the breath or caring. There's something about mindfulness which is hard to argue with, right? Of like, okay, well, let's just try to pay attention to things, and not get too kind of lost in the question of the presence or absence of like faith, But I think it can be very, of course, it can be hard, and certainly hard to feel like you're trying to convince anyone else to sit. I mean, I've really lost. I mean, I never felt like I was a very like evangelist. I mean, it's like it's like you trust who shows up and who comes, and it may or may not be for them. But I have the notion of trying to convince anyone about the Dhamma just feels very distasteful, because you start having to fall back on rationales that I don't have a lot of faith in,
Right.
I'll make you a better golfer or whatever,
Yeah, a lot of times people want to hear it though.
Yeah.
That's what they want to hear. So I was like, no, keep casting in the middle. I know there's like prize in the both sides, but like, keep casting in the middle. It's
Yeah.
fine. But
Yeah.
it does. It will lose for a lot of times. It lose the, I don't know, like face value that a lot of people are looking for, and it just seems yeah, irrelevant. I don't think what I do or how I practice or what I was taught is irrelevant at all. So I won't stop. But it's so interesting to see the dynamic of like what I'm saying and what they need to hear and what they want to hear. um, yeah, it's a funny
Yeah,
little
and of course, I
play.
mean, there's scaffolding that is, I'm not, I don't want to dismiss all of it, and
Mhm.
there is some sense of like, how are you, reassuring and, and I do think that there is something about like, there's something about nibbana that is just never going to be justifiable in human terms and social terms. And it has to simply just be justified for itself. And that getting there for any of us is part of that process, actually, of being like, you know, letting go of that scaffolding that has gotten us however far, Um, but it doesn't mean we don't build the scaffolding to get there. So it's, we almost like the hope thing. And some level, we're going to need parts of it. And when we don't, it'll fall away. We don't have to get rid of it even. Yeah. Thanks, Kate. Yeah. Hey, Audrey.
Um, I I hear you and Michelle use the word purification a lot, the purification process, and I think I have an understanding of what it means, but it feels so fundamental, and I would really love to hear you. I've been wanting for so long to hear you talk about it and explain what you mean by that, if you would. Thank you.
Oh. Mhm. Let's just sit and think about what would Michelle. Let's give her a little space. um, Michelle, I wasn't gonna do this, but this is, I think, a very good metaphor. She talks about like the that sense of when you're washing a dirty piece of clothing, right? A dirty fabric, and you put it in warm, soapy water, that there's something soothing about that process of the warm soapiness, and it feels good. But it reveals all of this muck, right? The dirt, the water gets dirty, you know, uh, and it's work, it's effort to do it. And I think there's something in there that is a good description of, or a good metaphor on some level of like the, parts of the practice that we go through, and there are times where things just come together, any of us, even if it's just for a few moments, the sense of like, oh, you kind of feel like you're dropped in, you're a little concentrated, things are, it's working or whatever, and that, we tend to sort of put into that category of like a purity, right? The experience of purity, where you're like, oh, this is why we're doing this. So we hope this would be just like this forever, But then things go out of alignment, the energy dissipates or the concentration dissipates. It's all conditioned things, and they're going to do that. And then we are confronted with, on one hand, some buoyancy, some upliftment, right? Some capacity and some clarity, right? Things did come together. And yet then we're sort of faced with disappointment, with, oh, then more physical pain arises, that we will tend to then experience more difficulty. And there is, you notice it more on retreat, where when you're in a period of practice that's longer and you're more protection, more contained, people will definitely notice that sense of like, oh, things come together one day and one sitting a day and it's amazing. And then the next day there's just like doubt and crankiness and all these bad feelings and emotions. And it's like, okay, there is this, it's a little bit harder to track often in our kind of daily lives if you're sitting once a week or sitting once a day, or if you're sitting a lot during a day and regularly, there's more ability to kind of see some of this. But a lot of times it's kind of it's happening in the context of just our daily life and attitudes. So you're not noticing the sort of ups and downs in the same way. But it's all to say that that is one way of describing that, like the experience of purity actually opens us up to an experience of purification, right? Of things kind of falling apart, but we've had an experience from which hopefully we can kind of watch that and observe it and learn in a more full way. But of course, there tends to be more identification, and all these things come up. And there is a way of looking at our sort of path of practice that is a little bit of a kind of up and down of those rhythms, opening and a contraction. There's different language we can use to describe it. But it's the work. It's the parts that don't feel inspired and don't feel pleasant and don't feel we lose that sense of possibility, right, for ourselves, our own hearts and minds. This doubt, or any of the hindrances that can arise are the sort of classic ways that we experience that sort of hardship. And I think the reason we talk about it as purification, because it's not off the path. Sometimes we think of like, oh, we're on the path and now this stuff is happening and we're off, right? And we're going in the wrong direction, versus like, no, this is the direction. This is how it unfolds, right? This is the path. Is the murkiness and the muck as much as the kind of high plateaus. So I think the reason we sort of use that language is in part to just kind of encourage and instill that sense that there's nothing that's not the path. At this point, if you're awake and you're trying, anything that unfolds can be folded in to your development. You can choose not to, and you can, one can stray off the path, of course. But even that can, some years go by and people come back to the practice, and there's a way of understanding things of like, okay, well, some other kind of work was happening in that, sort of little bit of wandering and meandering, so this idea, and of course, the Sudi Magga, right? The path of purification. It is what it is called in the Theravada tradition, this understanding that we are slowly purifying the motivation, ultimately, of our relationship to any moment. And that it's, have to go through all of the, then you want to be careful about like, impure or whatever, but we have to go through all of the relationships to the moment that are entangled in order to get there.
I have always, can I just tell you?
Yeah.
So that was so helpful. Thank you. That last part was really, gave me a lot of insight. Thank you. So I just want to tell you what I've always thought it was and see if that's even related now. The purification of motivation, that's for me was the linchpin in what you just said. So that might just be my little nut. But what I've always thought it was that causes and conditions create karma, and So there are impressions in us, in our minds, in our muscles, in our beings, in our psyches. They may be momentary, or they may be things that have been stored there for a long time. But then when we allow ourselves to actually create a really open space, let that human experience, not personalizing it, but just let that human experience that is in us right now, that we're fielding, let it, blossom and just go ahead and have its moment in the light of day. And that kind of, I thought that's what purification was, that to be willing to just be with, and like metabolizing, and some of it is personal karma that's stored and is deep, and it just keeps coming up, and like a gas releasing, and some of it is just, just conditioning of the human mind, and yet there it is showing up on our shore, and so we experience it, and then we also go ahead and put it in the light of day with compassion, and that somehow I thought that's what purification.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's unrelated. I think, with all of these things, it takes a while to kind of translate from different, kind of language patterns and sort of ways of talking about different things. I think that the side of it that feels very resonant, which is the aspect of what is there arising is something to be with, right? Without judgment, without attachment, that there is a relationship to whatever is arising. We'll say in this context, it sounds mostly you're talking about in the heart, mind kind of patterns. That there's a way of being with it, and that's healthy, in a way that is not, right? So the way that you're with patterns that kind of keeps them going and keeps our entanglement with them, versus that sees them really clearly and allows them to sort of play out, but doesn't kind of need to perpetuate them. That certainly feels very resonant of a kind of important part of the process, and why we call it purification, in terms of that there's something difficult in it, is that that's hard to do. It's hard to experience these internal patterns without reaffirming them or suppressing them and repressing them, but to really see them, like, what you're saying, with compassion, with clarity, so that they're not repressed, but also not necessarily fed, and that requires a whole bunch of skills and capacities that we're building in the process of doing it. I think what maybe doesn't, I'd say to be something more careful with, is like I think where it can lead to, in a different context, is the idea of more sort of like catharsis, or that like there's something that needs to be expressed, or there's something that needs to be born, or there's something that's coming into being that I'm like facilitating. I can just say that I have seen lots of people just go in a lot of loops with that. The feeling like something is about to happen is like a classic thing, where we start to be invested in some next thing, like something is, oh, you feel like something's coming, and that it's gonna, and that you're there's a leaning into a future moment that you can start to get kind of very involved in that energetically, and it doesn't go anywhere, period. It just doesn't. I mean, there's birth, life, and death, of course. It goes in that direction, but that's very different than the allowing of what's happening to arise and pass, right? And so I think that it's just one of those things where sort of like the orientations can be different, or the idea that there's something hidden that wants to be expressed, something underneath that is not quite seen, but that is happening. All of that is to be careful with, and in general, not the approach of Vipassana, which is to say you are observing what is directly present, which is directly arisen, right? That you're not looking for something that's not there. You're not trying to call up something outside of the Brahma Viharas, which is sort of like, there's a method that we try to kind of like contain that in. There's not a sense of like bringing to the foreground past painful experiences or conjuring in a way that is, trying to kind of manipulate more energetically. I'm not saying you are saying that, but I'm just saying there's something about some of the language that you used that's also used kind of, or that can be used in sort of contexts that are oriented a little bit differently in that way. Does that make sense as a little bit of like a
Yeah,
refinement?
I'm pretty sure that I'm sitting pretty comfortably in the Vipassana orientation in terms of being with what is. But what I am really appreciating in terms of what you said before, and then where I think I am coming from, is the issue of motivation. I think that really having that be the linchpin of what you guys are calling purification process, that really strikes home for me. So that, why am I being with all of these things? I mean, I could just see, an attachment to outcome. Right when you
Oh yeah.
right when you said that, and that's really helpful.
Yeah, I mean that's like it's so deep. And what's neat to sometimes see is like how we're oriented differently around it, you know. Uh as an aversive type myself, like I really, it took a long time to see kind of partly what you're pointing at, which is that like a lot of my motivation to see things was to get rid of them,
Mhm.
for sure. And it's like you can't pathologize it. It's like you have to get like how many years of practice did that motivate me enough to do it? Before at some point I was like, oh, that's not quite pure motivation when we're talking about it, right? Or the more, of course the language is so, the greedy type notion of like, oh, you're trying to create something good. You're trying to, find some next thing, right? And create something really beautiful and an experience that's really pleasant. It's like, yeah, of course. So that is like, it's so baked in. I mean, it's so profound, it's so subtle, and to see it at all is amazing. And again, to not give ourselves a hard time about it, but to see, it's like, well, it's like these very subtle course corrections. Like, oh, it's a very little shift that happens. Really, that's not even you doing it. It's like, oh, you see something, and then you don't need to do it anymore, or not as much. Or when you see it, you sort of get a little bit of a sense of that flavor. And it's like this very subtle shift, but a very profound one, and that ultimately it all starts to be pretty subtle shifts that are happening. It's like sitting down for 45 minutes is like hard. That's like that's the big steering wheel, and then there's like all those little things that are amazingly impactful when they shift, but they're often very subtle, really, up to that point where you know, this idea ultimately, it's like there's no more desire for existence, and there's no more desire for non-existence.
Mm.
And that like and so that they're like for us, but also the existence or non-existence of any phenomena, right? Of any little teeny thing. So you really, that is like a thing sometimes just barometer of, or like a little measuring stick, we can bring up. Like, oh, yes, there is a desire for this to continue, or there's a desire for this to stop. And I mean, of course, we're not crazy for that. Things are hard and pleasant things are pleasant, and it's just a little bit of this sense of like, what is it? What is that freedom? That's another one of these words where you're like, it's freedom it doesn't even mean the thing we think it means. It's so beyond. What would that mean? Of like, you don't have a desire for existence or non-existence for ourselves or for any experience, So,
And you say it's subtle, but my experience is so profound, and that when you feel that magnetism of the truth, of what's true, it's amazing how palpable that is. Anyway, thank
yeah,
you so much.
absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Audrey. Julia, did you have a question? I wasn't sure.
I'm sorry, it was an accident. I was trying to figure out why people's hands are now flesh colored when they raise them instead of bright yellow. Sorry.
Oh, you can choose. Yes, you can choose whatever.
Sorry. Keep
You know
going.
what I just found? I found I can move people's boxes around. I never knew that. I can like rearrange the perfect Zoom screen if I wanted to, whatever that would be. Oh, yes, we can. That's real freedom, is the choosing your Zoom hand color. Aren't we lucky?
That was beautiful, active listening.
All right, everybody. Wonderful to be with you again. Yeah. Thank you so much. And one more weekend before Michelle returns. So I'll see you again next Sunday. Okay. All right. Take care, everyone.